So let's talk Clemson, because that defense is definitely stocked with pros. But tell me, who's Garrett Riley leaning on other than Will Shipley as a playmaker in that offense? Because it feels like that's what they've been lacking. It's not, there's no T. Higgins, Mike Williams, that just hasn't been there the last couple of years.
I think they've got some candidates. Clemson fans and Clemson coaches will consistently tell you about Bo Collins. Bo Collins is a guy we've seen. I am a little more skeptical that he becomes like those guys that you just mentioned, Mike Williams, a T. Higgins. But they do have some candidates. Cole Turner is a guy that showed some flashes last year. If you remember Nolan Turner, it's his younger brother. A guy that started playing football really late, so still learning the position, but extremely physically talented. The guy I've really got my eye on in terms of outside receiver is Adam Randall, though. He got hurt in, I believe it was in summer camp. It may have been in spring practice, though, last year, which limited him heavily over the course of last season. Played sparingly, but a big physical receiver. He's 6'4", 230 type guy who apparently has looked fantastic. And I think Garrett Riley is going to find ways to get that dude the ball. Antonio Williams was fantastic as well for them last year in the slot. He may end up being their best receiver, both from a pro standpoint and from a college standpoint, because of his explosiveness, his reliability. And so I think there's enough there at receiver for Garrett Riley to find a way. Because remember, TCU had one real star receiver last year. It was Quentin Johnston. The other guys were really good college receivers, but were elevated by that system with Garrett Riley, putting them in the best position. So I think he's going to be able to do that with this Clemson offense. I also would say keep an eye on Phil Maffa, the backup running back who physically looks the part. TCU ran a lot of two-back sets last year with Kendre Miller and Amari DeMarcado. I think you're going to see that a lot with Clemson this year too, because those two running backs are fantastic.
Well, and I like the idea of Dabo bringing in new blood, fresh ideas, because I was a little worried when they promoted from within on both sides of the ball last year. Were they getting a little too insular? And this reminds me of when they hired Brent Venables as the DC, or when they hired Chad Morris as the OC, and things just sort of opened up for them.
It really does. And I think Dabo Swinney sort of gets criticized fairly or unfairly for his loyalty to the assistants that he's promoted from within. And I would argue that the jury's still out a little bit on Wes Goodwin on defense, who was a defensive assistant and analyst under Brent Venables, who got promoted to the defensive coordinator job. That defense was outside of the top 25 for the first time since 2012 last year. That defense was disappointing. That defense should have been one of the top 10 defenses in the country when you look at the number of guys they put in the NFL and the talent that they left there. So they have to take a step forward as well. But when Dabo Swinney has really needed to, or more when he's had the opportunity to, when he's had an opportunity that you can't pass up. Garrett Riley was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. He has gone and gotten those guys. Chad Morris was a revolutionary change for that Clemson offense, which led into Tony Elliott, who ran a different version of sort of a similar thing, Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. But they were so talented that system could be vanilla, and they could be more predictable because their talent was great. Well, now Garrett Riley is going to bring in a system that's going to really accentuate the individual talents. And so I give Dabo Swinney a lot of credit, going out, making it happen, and honestly, paying enough where Garrett Riley was going to leave TCU.
So another one that I'm curious about, and it feels like we're not talking about them much, but they've got a big non-conference game week 2 that we're probably all going to watch, because whoever loses, existential crisis happens. It's Miami. They've got Texas A&M coming in week 2. And then, we've after last season, and especially the way Florida State destroyed them, we kind of set them aside like, okay, we'll talk about you guys when you're ready. But I heard Mario Cristobal at ACC Media Days, and you hear people talk about Francis Mainoa and Samson Okinola, the freshman offensive lineman who they feel like can play now. Can they be that much better on the offensive line? Because I feel like that is a fast way to get better, period.
It really is, by just getting massive. Those two guys are massive. And Mario Cristobal kind of said as much. He's like, look, these guys are so big that as freshmen, you just kind of throw them out there. And if nothing else, they're really hard to get around because of the mass. So I think they can be significantly better on the offensive line late in the year. I think they're going to go through some growing pains early on, particularly when you play a Texas A&M who's going to be extremely talented on the defensive side, particularly on the defensive line. So as long as they don't let that break them, then I think they will be significantly better late in the year, which is when the schedule gets absolutely brutal. I mean, they have an early bye week. Their bye week is the last week of September, and then after the bye, they play North Carolina, NC State, Clemson, and Florida State, all in the
Man.
back in the last 8 games. So, and then you sprinkle in like a Louisville in there, which is a team that, you know, I don't really know what Louisville's going to be, but the schedule sets up nicely for them. So I do think Miami is in a good place from the fact that we're not talking about them. We don't have a ton of expectations. I do think they'll be better in a lot of areas, particularly in the offensive line. I think they'll play better at quarterback. How many more wins does that equal? I'm not sure. It should be a bowl team, but I'm not sure they get to like 9. But I do think this is a team that's going to take a step forward, and probably a significant one by the end of this year because of the youth that they're going to have with the 2 tackles that you mentioned. I expect Ruben Bain to play a ton as a defensive end on that defensive line. So I think there's reason to be excited about Miami, but you got to sort of take the long-term seasonal excitement and wait to see what this team could be at the end of next year.
How hard is that given the investment they've made and you know, they paid a lot to get Mario Cristobal away from Oregon. They said, okay, we're going to invest more in the program now. Do you think they can be patient enough to let that come to fruition?
I think as long as you see steps, yes. Now, will they be patient? 5 years patient? No. But I don't think they're going to need to be. Mario Cristobal's Oregon team took a big step forward in year 2. So while I don't think they'll take quite the step forward at Miami, I do think next year this team should be really good. And will it compete for a 12-team playoff? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I do think that they did a really good job on the portal this year. Matt Lee, a guy that they get over from UCF at center, it's a really good addition. You mentioned Francisco Mauigoa. His brother was one of the best players on Washington State's defense last year. Exactly. He transfers over and helps them defensively. And they've done a good job. They got a couple transfer corners in as well. But does that get you to contending for the ACC? I don't think so. I do think, though, by next year, we should have some expectations around this Miami program.
Yeah, it's interesting because now Florida State is dominating the conversation in the Sunshine State because they've been the most successful. They feel the oldest and the most mature. Now, we've talked about the ones that we don't necessarily think will wind up in the ACC championship game. Let's talk about the favorites. Florida State opens against LSU. About as good of a challenge as you can start with. Where is this team in terms of maturity and what it takes to get over the hump and win the conference?
They are saying the right things, Andy. They really are. I've got to see it to believe it right now for a couple of reasons. One, they lost the 3 games that they played against the 3 best teams a year ago. They lost to Clemson, they lost to NC State, and they lost to Wake Forest. And some of that was very self-inflicted. I look at the NC State game in particular, and that was a game that Devin Leary leaves the game. Jack Chambers comes in for NC State. You got to win that game. You've got to find a way to win that game. And it was really self-inflicted the way that they didn't. So how do you get over that? Being in those situations helps, but then there's also just the doing it factor. The other part is they are going to be expected to win every game other than Clemson and LSU, and we will judge them by Clemson and LSU. But those are 2 games where they are, quite honestly, punching above their weight. Clemson and LSU are more talented football teams. So how do you overcome that as well? They're saying the right things. They're led in the right way. Jared Verse is a fantastic player. Jordan Travis is a fantastic player. They are deep in a lot of spots. But I think if you were to line up the games against the LSU or Florida State and say, all right, who's got more pros and who's got more first, second, third round pros, Florida State's going to come in third of that bunch, I think. So can you get over the stage, the expectations, and then the talent deficiency with those 2 schools? I don't know. I think Florida State's going to be very good, and they're saying the right stuff, but I got to see it to believe it.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.